Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, February 11th, 2021. Just checking on that, right? 21? Yeah, we're all right. That's where we are. Okay, it is day 3 of Impeachment 2. Like take 2, if there's scene 3, take 2. I don't know, something like that. I mean, it's some sort of clapperboard for the morning of any of the mornings of Impeachment Trial 2. Things back underway today. I don't know, exciting, riveting, revolting. I don't know. Day yesterday. And depending on, I guess, where you sit, will help determine where you stand, as Greg always reminds us, on this impeachment, no less than anything else. This morning, I believe the case in chief for the House managers comes to a close, and Trump's counsel will have the opportunity to present their case, and to no one's surprise, it appears to be setting up for a giant festival of whataboutism. It appears that their approach to defense of the president, besides being, well, he didn't say you should murder the vice president, he just came really close, or something like that. The rest of the defense is supposed to be, he never said these things, and other people have said things where they say that they need to fight for something as well, and we haven't impeached them. But, of course, Jonathan Turley setting things up that way, of course, as well, saying if the whole trial ends up boiling down to angry rhetoric, and whether or not, how does he put it? If this trial boils down to irresponsible political rhetoric, the public could find it difficult to distinguish between the accused, the prosecutors, and the jury in all of this. Oh my. So Turley, I guess, decides that this boils down to irresponsible political rhetoric. Of course, that leaves out the part about mass violence and murder, which I think is the distinguishing characteristic between the even irresponsible rhetoric, if that's what it is, from the jurors, from the prosecution, from anybody. Look for the one with the murder connected to it, and that will remind you where you're supposed to be. So, what can I tell you? It's been pretty interesting. So, last night ended with some sort of disagreement and confusion on the Senate floor. Needless confusion. I am here to correct what happened last night. It should have been a very simple thing to do. Quite honestly, I'm annoyed and dismayed at having the trial presided over by Pat Leahy, who, at his best, was very frequently befuddled by complicated rules, which is something that you would think that, an experienced senator wouldn't let happen to him. Past chair of the Judiciary Committee. But I don't know. Out of a spirit of generosity, if there is any here, I would say this is something he allows to happen to himself because he likes to be sure he's following the rules and isn't shortchanging anybody on on what they're entitled to under the rules, which is nice, but it isn't, what was necessary from the chair yesterday. I guess, like most senators, I guess I'll say this. It's wrong that the Senate President pro tem should be as dependent on the parliamentarians for what he should be saying in delivering a ruling and what the ruling should be as any other member of the Senate. But that's generally the truth. But yesterday's objection came from Mike Lee, who objected and wanted stricken from the record any reference to reporting that which of the House managers, Greg, was Greg's here, by the way, everybody. Good morning,
Jamie
Greg.
Raskin.
Was it Raskin who was reading
Yes.
the report? Okay.
I think. Certainly Raskin was the one that decided on the end.
Oh, yes.
But,
well, he was the lead manager. I think
I think it was Raskin, but I'm
not sure. And I came to it sort of in the middle of what was going on and rewound it. It might have been Castro who had read this thing. But Mike Lee objected at the end of the presentation that the quotations attributed to him in the newspaper report that was read aloud were not really his words. That's in some doubt, considerable doubt at this point. But he caused quite an uproar as he asked for the words to be stricken from the record, and Leahy, not immediately sure what to do, and relied on the parliamentarian, who I think also got the call wrong. But they were trying to tell him, well, first they handed him a ruling that said, listen, the manager's presentation doesn't have to be limited to the material or subjects outlined under the rules or at the beginning of the trial, and that was not quite applicable to what Lee's objection was, and that just incensed Lee even more. He wanted the words stricken from the record. The correct answer there was no objection from the jurors is in order at this time, or indeed at any time during the trial. Counsel may move to strike words from the record, but they haven't. You could suggest to them later that, off the record, that they move to strike this stuff from the record, but you're a juror, and by the way, you were admonished to keep silence upon pain of imprisonment at the beginning of every day's proceedings. I don't know what you think you're doing on your feet, but I guess you want to spend the night in jail. Do you want to do that, or do you want to withdraw your objection now? But instead, they actually acquiesced to what Lee was asking for and came back, and Raskin came back and said, fine, whatever. We don't need it. We'll withdraw it. But that was an unnecessary
But
gesture.
we have the right to introduce it later
Yes.
if it's germane.
And it is, and they should bring it back, because now lots of people are calling for, in addition to being germane, it ought to require his testimony as a witness, Lee. He should have to stand there and refute himself.
So let's talk about what it was.
What was it? Oh, you want me to do that? I thought you were introducing your own discussion of it. Okay. Well, I don't know. What was it? It was the quotation. This was the story of his supposedly having fielded an errant phone call from Trump and or Giuliani. I think Giuliani was the one who actually ended up getting through. They were trying to call Tommy Tuberville, however he pronounces it, and apparently nobody had his telephone number. So they just dialed numbers at random, or I don't know. They looked something up. They ended up calling Mike Lee's cell phone, and the story was Mike Lee answers and says, hey, this isn't Tommy Tuberville, but here, the president and Giuliani are calling for you, and handed him the phone. And then there were some other words exchanged that were attributed to Mike Lee, all of which apparently were sourced to the newspaper by Lee himself and or his office. But he now denies that any of those were his words. To what effect, I don't know.
And he was way more afraid of somehow or other being implicated in providing evidence to somehow hold Trump accountable. He was way more afraid of that.
Yeah.
And upset about that than the fact that vandals sacked the Capitol and tried to kill Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi. That he wasn't upset about.
No, and there was another story.
And the thing is, Samuel Benson, who was a reporter for Deseret, if that's how it's pronounced, news in Utah, says in an interview last Thursday, Senator Mike Lee told me on the record that both Trump and Giuliani misdialed him on January 6th, thinking he was Tommy Tuberville.
Yeah. So
Lee
now
answered the first call from Trump, and he missed the second call from Giuliani, and then got a voicemail.
Yeah. So
That's what happened.
He was excited to be part of the record.
That happened, or that it was his own words somehow that said that, oh yeah, I was involved somehow. He didn't want to be responsible for the fact that Giuliani miscalled him, and therefore led to public information about how they were really trying to delay things. He didn't want to be associated with that. one way or the other.
Maybe that was the
reason. And you know, so he flipped out. And yeah, the procedure part, you know, you're the expert here. He probably didn't have any right to speak out at all. And you could hear the parliamentarian in the background trying to tell Leahy what to do, and he wasn't getting it. But, you know, that was at the end. I don't know how many people watched.
I think the parliamentarian told him the wrong thing, if you ask me. But then, I don't know. Leahy was reading it correctly. It just was inapposite to what Lee was objecting to. The real answer was, who are you? What do you mean I object?
As I heard it, and I might have gotten it wrong because I kept a lot of the stuff in the background because at that point it wasn't that interesting. But it sounded like Lee objected to the fact that the record said something that he says he didn't say. Right. He didn't object at the time.
Yes, it wasn't the timely objection.
That would say, okay, if you didn't object then, shut up now. Besides the fact that if you open your mouth, I'm sending you to jail. But besides that, you should have done this like 2 hours ago. But remember, procedural objections are what the Republicans are using to try to not hold Trump accountable, because it's a procedural thing that we shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah,
that's okay on their side.
Yeah, he thought he was still in the Senate and he was sitting as a juror, and it's different. And yeah, I know you're an important guy, but think about, you know, here it makes sense to analogize to a courtroom. No, you know, jurors can't object. When have you ever seen that in a movie? I object. Well, who are you?
Yeah, I'm one of the jurors. Stands up and says to the judge, "You took my words out of context because
Wait
I'm
a second.
witness."
Yeah, what are
you doing sitting in the jury box then?
Right.
Get out of here.
Yeah. So I mean, that wouldn't work. And I mean, but the whole thing is, this is a game that's meant to be played by the counsel and the parties to the case, and you are, again, to keep silence upon pain of imprisonment. And I would, I would say in the morning, the best thing to do, this having passed without event, is to remind everybody this morning, when we say all persons must keep silence, this means you. I mean, that's who's in the chamber. You guys, senators, keep silence. Last night you should have gone to prison for speaking up, but we're very tolerant here. And we remind you that another outburst like that, young man, and you will be imprisoned for, well, as long as we feel necessary.
So then Leahy says, well, my understanding of what's going on here is that there is a rule, and I found it, or the parliamentarian found it, and it basically says we're allowed to admit stuff that isn't necessarily under this other rule here. And Lee really flipped out and said, that's not what I'm saying. I don't care whether you admit it or not admit it. The point is my words are wrong.
Yeah, which they weren't. But yes.
Which they weren't.
And
but that's what happened yesterday if anybody was watching. And that was the tail wagging the dog, of course, on the whole day. But, I think what's so interesting about it is that it happened at the end of a long, passionate day where everybody's tempers were short. And it's just, to me, very revealing about what things senators get upset about and what they don't get upset about. Yes. Here's Mike Lee flipping out at the idea that somehow or other he might be associated with how people vote, and he doesn't want that. And here's Josh Hawley with his feet on the desk, not upset about officers being crushed to death and people ransacking everybody's desk, including Ted Cruz's desk, which was pretty funny.
It was.
Let's look through here. He's got to have something in this briefing book that we could use.
Yeah, that was really pretty amazing. I've seen that video before, but what was really amazing was there was a brief moment there, just to let you know who you were dealing with. There's a brief moment there where they read his notes on objecting to the Arizona electoral votes, and they were outraged and furious. And they said, that's it. He was against us the whole time. He was going to sell us out. We should get him. We should get him. And it was notes about how he was going to object to the electoral vote, just like they wanted. They didn't even understand what they were looking for senators to do. They didn't understand what they were looking at in plain English. It took them a few seconds, and then one of them had to say, no, wait, this is good. He's on our side. We shouldn't murder him.
All of that stuff happened. Everybody saw that. So, again, I want to step back from the procedural stuff at the end and try to put the whole big picture in context here. That's my job.
Okay.
And the thing is, I'm not going to recap the incredibly compelling, upsetting stuff that was shown, particularly yesterday afternoon. The way they set it up is in the morning they described it, and in the afternoon they showed it. and seeing some of the never-before-seen video of Mitt Romney almost running into the mob, except his life was saved by Eugene Goodman, who not only saved a bunch of senators, but specifically saved Romney, because as Romney's walking down the hall trying to figure out where to go, Goodman's running the other way and passes him and says, "Don't go that way, come with me this way." And Romney turns around and runs. And something similar happened to Chuck Schumer. So these two guys were like within 100 feet of getting decapitated here. Yeah. Because there's no way that the mob was going to just say, "Oh, okay, you're one of the good guys," especially with Romney.
Yeah, that's true. They would probably be very angry at Romney. Although I will note that every time these guys ran into authorities, the cops, there were several that they attacked, but Goodman somehow they just stood there and yelled in his face a lot, which was great. I mean, thank God, because they could have done anything to him. But there were a lot of people who were like dogs catching the car. Once you get to, I guess if they were pretty clear that they were mad at Romney. So that could have been pretty serious.
Yeah, part of it was outside versus Pence. Inside. Outside, everybody was in gear and fighting, and inside, once they got in, they figured they were triumphant. And so now to see somebody who's not, in riot gear,
right?
It is just, and inside the building is a very, very different atmosphere and vibe. But in any case, a lot of that was shown. Some of the senators, including the Republican senators, are quite upset. Stories are that Jim Langford was really upset and needed to be comforted by Senator Daines because he was just upset about the whole thing. Yet,
that's wonderful.
Stepping back and looking at the big picture, one of the tweets that I sent yesterday got sent around quite a lot, probably more than any other tweet I've ever done. And I said, too many stories about how Trump will be acquitted, and that's politics, but not enough stories about how he's clearly guilty. And that's the truth. And the fact is that what the managers did was first on the day before show that the riot was bad.
Yes, it was.
And then today, using some visual evidence, showed how close they were to the chamber, where they were going, how they were led away by Goodman, and so on and so forth. But really then went and tied Trump's months-long use of Stop the Steal and the election's going to be stolen, and laid out the case for incitement. And they did it quite in a compelling way.
It was pretty good.
So that was yesterday. And the thing is, that in terms of looking at the reaction today, which is basically what we're doing, rather than trying to recap the entire many hours of evidence and presentation, upon all the things, one of the security guys says, in answer to Jelani Kopp says, the Constitution should have placed adjudication of impeachment in the hands of the Supreme Court because the rationale for lifetime appointment to the court was to place the justices beyond political concerns. It's not hard to see how politics would interfere with Senate impeachment. But upon all the things says, but the reason the power is given to the Senate is because impeachment is inherently a political matter. Okay, in any given presidential impeachment, the question presented is whether the conduct of the president amounts to a high crime against the very nature of the office, demanding his immediate removal from elected office. And that's a subjective, not legal, inevitably political question. And that's the way you have to look at their reactions. Otherwise, nothing they do will make sense.
Yes, I think all good points there. They probably should have. I don't know whether they spent any time debating whether or not the Supreme Court should have had a hand in that, but
I don't think they did. I think that was, kind of settled because he's not president anymore. So Rand Paul in the strategy of deciding that it wasn't constitutional at all, and therefore whatever happens doesn't really matter, is really going to be the strategy they take. Now, you'll see a lot of nonsense and noise. Here's noise. Jonah Goldberg says, if the House had followed Andrew McCarthy's advice and charged dereliction of duty or simply betrayal of his presidential oath, the managers would have proven their case 10 times over today. And I.J. Bailey answers appropriately, the case has been proven 1,000 times over. Jonah knows the only reason Trump won't be convicted is because Republican senators and Republican voters don't want to. Everything else is noise.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it's not like he hasn't been charged with violation of the presidential oath, I suppose. It keeps getting stated that way by the House managers, certainly.
Right, it does. And the other side of the coin, and I think they wrote that before the House managers had finished their presentation. But the fact of the matter is if he doesn't get convicted, it's on them. This is Nicholas Grossman. If GOP senators vote to excuse Trump for his lie-filled effort to overturn the election that culminated in violent insurrection, it's not because Dems failed to find the perfect argument or insulted them in some way. That's Lindsey Graham's line. Oh, they were really arrogant and how could we possibly listen to them? They were over the top. Somebody writing a baseball crank, Dan, whatever his name is, in NRO is writing. I look at the videos, and of course I feel like I should convict them, but then I listen to the smarmy, arrogant, Democratic House managers, and I feel like I can't. And Grossman is pointing out here, it's not because them failed to find the perfect argument or insulted them in some way. Mm-hmm. It's because they're making a choice to excuse it. It's on them.
Yeah.
And anybody writing that, oh, it's not perfect, or I didn't like this, or he said this when he should have said that, or, he said, magazine when he should have said,
clip. Right.
It's garbage. It's just an excuse not to do the right thing. And everybody knows it. It's just that the senators are going to stick to this and say, okay, well, we have already pre-decided that this is going to be our excuse, and that's why I don't need to watch, or I can't watch, or I don't want to watch. And that's why Hawley was who put it? Somebody on MSNBC, Michael Steele, said Hawley basically put his feet up and was doing his nails. Mm-hmm. He didn't want to watch. He wasn't paying attention. He's one of the insurrectionists. He's responsible. He was the one with his fist in the air. Of course he's not going to watch it. He's not going to convict, because that would mean convicting himself, and they're not going to do that.
Right. It's interesting, too. I mean, I wonder what would happen if they got to him and said, well, I understand. Rhetorically, it would be convicting yourself, but, really? You're not convicting yourself? You're convicting somebody else completely different, and you get to just continue being a senator? So what do you think? You want to do that?
Mm. So Nicholas Grossman follows up with, I was all set to defend the Constitution, as I swore an oath to do, but then a Democrat said something about a violent attack on America that I thought was a bit much, so now I can't.
Yeah, right. I don't know about that.
That's ridiculous. That is the entire defense that people who just do not or are paid to not want to understand what's going on here. It's pretty clear, and I think that the lines of argument are going to be twofold on the part of the Republicans. Argument number one, which some will use, like Rand Paul, is that the whole thing is unconstitutional anyway. And even though we voted that it was, it isn't, so I don't have to pay attention. Yeah. And I'll vote to acquit because it's not constitutional. And the other will be people, maybe like Langford, I don't know, who will look at this and say, this is horrible, this is really upsetting, this never should have happened. All of these people are responsible, but you still haven't proven that Trump did it. Yes. You haven't proven that Trump was the one who said it, because he didn't say it. He was being a mob boss, but not a. You can't find this smoking gun that says, I called the Proud Boys and said go. Right. And if you can't give me that, I'm not doing it. And how can you look at this evidence, and they haven't even finished yet, tying this to Trump? How could you look at that and not feel that he was responsible? Because I don't know, because I don't want to know. And that's basically the answer you're going to wind up hearing. Now, is it frustrating and is it really infuriating? Yeah, but there's nothing you can do about it, because it's inherently a political process. And upon all the things was right. And so because it's an inherently political process, and because the rules say they can, they will.
Yeah, all right. Well, we'll see what they come up with. Langford, I know, came to my attention yesterday. What was it he was saying? Oh, yes, right. He was trying out the technocratic argument, saying you can't disqualify someone from running for office until you first decide on removal, but it's impossible to remove someone from office when he's already gone from the office, so this impeachment trial is unconstitutional. He was trying that one on for size just 2 days ago, I think, but now has been struck emotionally by the presentation, and we'll need another excuse, I guess, or else he can always go back to, I'm very sad, but it's unconstitutional. I still believe that, even though we, as a Senate, decided otherwise. I think that was wrong, and whatever. So
what'll happen today is the managers will finish. I don't think that the defense starts until tomorrow, and they probably only need about 3 minutes. And they're going to basically get it. They may take 4 hours to do it. I don't know, but they're going to get up and say, we think that you know what to do. Thanks. bye
Yeah.
and sit down, and we'll waste your time for a couple hours while we make that point.
Okay.
And then the senators will do whatever they do, probably over the weekend, which is unusual for the Senate. They don't like working.
Right. Yes, and it's not even nice weather in D.C., so they'll be very upset.
This is from
about that,
Politico.
cranky.
Still, Democrats said more Republicans may be privately reconsidering their votes. I think the only person who's actually reconsidering his vote is Bill Cassidy. And I think Bill Cassidy has decided, for whatever political reason, he wants to be more independent. And so he's happy to risk, or at least willing to risk, if not happy, a censure by his own radicalized state delegation. A lot of these senators are in that situation. But he is ready to say, okay, well, I'm just going to vote the way I think. And they are withholding judgment until they hear everybody, which is a proper thing to say.
Nice. What a nice thing to
some
say,
of them aren't,
sir.
like Lindsey Graham and Rick Scott, who said it was a complete waste of time, which is such an arrogant slap in the face to every police officer who was on duty that day, which we saw yesterday. Yes. Oh, by the way, the other takeaway I had from watching all the video yesterday, never blame line people for management mistakes. Those cops were doing everything they possibly could to try to save people's lives yesterday, the ones we saw. Right? And the fact that their managers put them in that situation is not the same thing as the cops let them in.
That's true. There was certainly video that deserves review that seems to indicate, well, that some of the cops may have done something weird.
There, but on the whole.
Right. Yeah, no doubt about that. There were a lot of cops that just put their bodies on the line and were brutalized for doing it.
Taken off, lost fingers, etc., got crushed, etc., etc., etc.
Good advice there. Okay, well, we'll return to this in 2 minutes. Much more to say about it, much more to sum up, and look forward to today and into the weekend. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Much more to cover here. You know, I did want to mention one thing about that phone call to Mike Lee, but they thought it was Tommy Tuberville, and everybody denies everything now. There was more commentary on that from Tuberville, who apparently, he seemed to confirm the whole thing. He also says that in his brief conversation with Trump, when he got the phone handed to him, he said to him at some point, listen, I can't stay on the phone right now. You know, things are getting kind of crazy here in the Capitol.
People are trying to kill me and I have to run away. Yeah. Excuse me, I'll get back to you.
But in particular, that he told him they just took the vice president out of the chamber in order to keep him safe. His Secret Service detail just removed him. And that becomes an important detail because it becomes now proof that Trump is now aware of just how crazy things are getting in the Capitol and that Mike Pence's life is possibly in danger, according to the Secret Service, and you're supposed to take that seriously. And then it is afterwards, after finding out that the Secret Service believes that Pence's life is in danger, that Trump starts tweeting out more incitements against Mike Pence, which also by itself should be fairly damning. And it is obvious to the president, or the guy that was playing the role of president at the time, that the vice president, and presumably therefore also the Speaker of the House, the president of the Senate pro tem, the entire line of succession, is being evacuated for fear of their lives, and he decides now's the time for more inciting tweets and whipping up
I think
violence even further.
I think the giveaway there is when Trump said back to Tuberville, they're taking Pence out. Which side? The Secret Service or our side?
Right, and which door are they going?
That should have given him a clue.
Yeah, well, this is. I think it was all laid out pretty well, but I assume that House managers will get another chance in summation at some point to hammer that point home. And I saw
and I'm
Huffington
expecting
Post
that today. I don't think that this
thing
thing's going to go on too long.
I guess not, although yesterday's reporting was that it might go through the weekend and that the vote would take place early next week, the actual verdict, which is longer than I thought. Right,
but through the weekend, doesn't that mean that everybody finishes Friday and then they discuss it Saturday and Sunday?
There will be questions. Usually they'll give some time over to that. I would guess that, the House, the defense, the Trump counsel will put on their presentation today. And then I think there's time for questions. And last time we saw it was kind of grandstanding, but, they did it.
Well, we'll see what happens. The reporting I saw said still it's the managers today. They got a total of 16 hours, 8 yesterday, 8 today. And then,
okay. All right.
And then tomorrow, Friday, is the defense, and then they talk and then they vote. Unless they want to make it go further. But, we'll see. That'll be clarified today. I have this really interesting piece from Matt Glassman. Matt Glassman is an ex-aide, now a senior fellow at Georgetown.
Oh, yeah.
And has some interesting comments here I thought you'd find amusing. He says, one congressional truism is this. If you ran the Senate on the House procedures, you'd lose a couple of things, but it'd be fine. But if you ran the House on the Senate procedures, it would turn into some combo of Lord of the Flies and Mad Max within hours.
Oh, I see.
Just imagine Gomert hour, except you can't stop it. And it's happening in the middle of trying to conduct business. Meanwhile, Matt Gaetz is moving to table the motion to proceed, not a specific one, everyone. And Andy Biggs won't give unanimous consent to anything, so there's nothing to do but try to move motions to proceed. And all of this is happening without the electronic voting system, so every roll call is taking an hour.
Yeah.
Right? The Speaker has no discretion to recognition. It's good because it points out how the Senate works. The Senate works by tradition. The House works by rules, in other words. The Speaker has no discretion in recognition, so the Majority Leader has to spend every minute standing on the floor. Otherwise, some backbencher will get control and offer his own motion to proceed. And another hour for the tabling roll call. And then Boebert, Gaetz, Green, and Biggs have now made a pact to always have one of them guarding the floor, and they're objecting to every single unanimous consent. And the good news is we don't need to set up a hotline system and maybe 6 weeks for the vote-a-rama on the budget resolution. And meanwhile, a standoff is formed where people on both sides are refusing to end a quorum call because 26 different members have holds on more than 500 bills.
Yeah, that's funny and likely to be true. But you know what I found interesting about it was right at the outset. What's the admonishment we always hear from people who are opposed to any sort of filibuster reform is, oh, my God, more than anything, you don't want to turn the Senate into the House. And right off the bat,
well, maybe you do.
Yeah, his immediate warning is, you know what, if you turn the Senate into the House, it wouldn't really be so bad. What would really be dangerous is turning the House into the Senate.
Exactly.
So that's pretty funny.
And that's a great point that he makes here and you make, and that's why I just found this whole thing so funny. Now, you're intimately familiar with each one of the examples he's using and can visualize exactly what that means. And I'm just reading it all as a whole and saying, oh, my gosh, turning the floor over to Louis Gohmert is a mistake.
Yes.
And there's always going to be a Louis Gohmert in the House, right?
Yeah,
we just elected a Marjorie Taylor Greene. There's always going to be somebody.
True. And we got several at this moment. But, yeah, I mean, essentially, the Senate works the way it works because it's a relatively small body. I mean, it's gotten bigger over the years, but if you had 435 senators, one, there'd be too many competing egos, and two, at least one or two of the 435 is bound to be a Louis Gohmert, Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene type, and it's not necessarily the case out of the 100 in the Senate, and it would be real mayhem, but that's true, yeah. So
right, and again, this is I'm telling you this from a layman's perspective, and I think that many of our listeners will kind of get it from this angle. because we're not experts on all the procedure. But you look at the House and you think, okay, well, basically what happens is some backbencher stands up and says, unless it's a privileged resolution to impeach or something like that, a backbencher stands up and says, I want to do this. And basically whoever has the chair and the gavel, and let's pretend it's the speaker in this case, says, no, you can't.
Right.
Well, why not? Because the rules say you can't.
Yeah.
You know, boom. Gavel
That's what should have
comes
happened
down.
to
In
Lee
the Senate,
yesterday.
right? But in the Senate, same thing happens. And the newly elected Senator, Tommy Tuberville, who doesn't know anything about procedure, says, I want to do this. And somebody in the chair says, well, you can't. And Tuberville says, why not? And they say, well, because tradition says you're not supposed to do this. And Tuberville says, well, I want to do it anyway. And then you go, okay, well, I don't know what to do now.
Yeah. And then, Leahy mumbles for a while.
And that's how Lee wound up doing what he was doing.
Yeah. Right. And here, Lee, there's a perfectly good reason yesterday why they should have treated it like the House. You know, while we're in an impeachment, you're all like House backbenchers. You don't have a role in this. Be quiet.
But we're senators, and we're going to act like senators. And here's the Senate ethos: is any one senator could stand up and do this or that or anything else. Well, not now. Yeah, but why not? Who's going to say I can't? Well, you know, I have to discuss this with the parliamentarian, and then we have to take a vote on it. And yeah, but you're voting on the wrong thing. You're voting on the procedure, and I want my words stricken, and your words up there aren't saying strike his words, so I'm going to stand up and have a temper tantrum, even though my words were correct. That's not the point. I'm trying to make a point. Oh gosh, this is the Senate, isn't it?
Yep. All right. Well, what a day. Okay.
What a day.
I'm looking at something completely extraneous and distracting, but.
All right, while you follow up on that, this is
that?
Jonathan Bernstein writing. Is the Republican Party headed for a schism? A few former officials breaking away is no big deal. A couple of ex-Bush people are talking about starting a third party. Is that going to be of any benefit? Only if current officials join them. And I think one of the big mistakes that analysts have, and particularly media analysts have made with this particular Republican Senate, is they keep treating people like Mike Lee and Rand Paul as conservatives or maybe libertarians who are doing any of this on principle. In other words, they treat them like they're Justin Amash. And there is only one Justin Amash. The rest of them have nothing to do with principle. It's Lindsey Graham and Josh Hawley averting their eyes because I don't have to rule on stuff I don't see, you know. And so for 4 years, they didn't see Trump's tweets. They didn't see anything. I see nothing. I hear nothing. But they're all well aware that Neera Tanden mean tweets some of the senators. And so they're going to make some noise at one of her confirmation hearings. And everybody treats this as completely normal. They're not Justin Amash. None of these people are doing this on principle. It's a bunch of garbage and hogwash. You know, Trump's guilt, what he did, what happened as a result was clearly laid out. You either see it or you don't want to see it.
Right. Well,
it's not that you can't see it. It's not that you would come to a different conclusion. All of that is garbage. It's because you don't want to.
Yeah. The third party talk always strikes me as mostly useless, of course. But
here's the thing. All you need is 3%, 4% slipping out of the Republican Party, and they lose a lot more than they're losing right now. A lot of these races were really, really, really close. So, you know, take 4%, optimistic 5% out, huge difference. And that's at a time that the Republican Party is losing steam. I think we talked about this yesterday in terms of Gallup saying people are much more pleased with the Democratic Party than the Republican Party at this particular point in time.
Yes, right.
You know, even Punchbowl, you know, some of the Republican-favored newsletters like Politico and Punchbowl. This one is from Punchbowl. No one who watched the presentation can come away believing that Trump didn't have a direct role in inciting the cataclysm of violence that erupted that day. Whether he should be convicted and sanctioned is another issue. They're not saying that he shouldn't be. They go through a whole list of some of the Republican excuses, listing them as excuses. The point is everybody saw what they saw, and then what happens, is sort of preordained because of politics.
Yes. Well, yeah, I always feel like the third-party discussion is always, it's always interesting theoretically, but yeah, it's true that they could siphon off enough votes to turn the Republican Party into a permanent minority or a permanent loser in close elections or even not so close elections. But you got to have people who are willing to put themselves through the rigors of a campaign in exchange for netting 3 to 4% of the vote and never achieving power. And I don't think most people put up with that for very long.
Right. This is a unique situation, though, as Jonathan Bernstein continues to write, and he talks about how the House impeachment managers did a good job laying everything out. The truth is, he says, that a lot of Republicans seem willing to let the party become more and more Trumpy. That means being comfortable playing footsie with white supremacists and other violent groups. He can make voting more difficult, even to overturn elections results when necessary, and generally less and less supportive of the rule of law and democracy. A party like that, with little aspiration to appeal to anybody beyond its strongest supporters, might still be competitive electorally thanks to the way two-party politics tends to work. And if it wins, it could put most of its efforts into tilting the rules more in its favor. But plenty of Republicans find Trump and the politics abhorrent, including a lot of governing and campaigning professionals and a fair number of former elected officials. One such group is considering formally breaking away and forming a new party. Whether a real schism is possible comes down to one thing. Will any current Republican politicians take the plunge and join them? And your answer and my answer is probably no.
Right. You end up becoming an ex-politician very quickly, usually.
Yeah, not only that, while you're there, even before you leave, you become just an Amash, isolated. Nobody wants to talk to you, and you don't get to do anything.
Yes, that's true. And speaking of Justin Amash, I thought it was interesting. Something I've been staving for a while since they were debating removing Marjorie Taylor Greene from her committee assignments. He pointed out at the time, the threshold for losing a committee assignment is actually pretty low, at least among Republicans anyway. He points out that, right, exactly. I mean, that's precisely what I was going to say. Oh, wow. She also stepped on the the button to end the call. Well, I'll tell you this. Justin Amash saying that the threshold to lose a committee assignment was low when it happened to him. As he points out, I was once stripped of a committee assignment for voting differently from Paul Ryan on a budget resolution. Now, it may have been the case that he was a member of the budget committee at the time, which, puts some interesting perspective on it and helps us understand why they might have been so mad that they remove him from his committee assignments. But, and that's considered a vote of party loyalty, but it still remains true that Republicans were willing to remove him from his committee assignments for a political transgression like that one, as opposed to say threatening the life of the speaker. Which, by the way, it would be interesting if we had the vote to remove Marjorie Taylor Greene from committees just a little bit later. Like we all knew what the stakes were, but it would be really interesting to have put the question to the House after having seen the impeachment managers lay out the intent with which the insurrectionists entered the Capitol, and especially after yesterday's airing of yesterday's video of them wandering the halls saying, "Nancy, where are you?" to then be defending keeping Marjorie Taylor Greene on her committees because she tweeted about or agreed with the need to execute Nancy Pelosi would be a much tougher sell politically, even though the vote would probably be the same. So, all right, Greg, you straightened things out.
Wait,
everything's fine?
Yeah, the deer decided they were going to invade the yard, and Abby
Would the deer like to speak?
wouldn't have any bit of it, so she had to go out and chase them.
All right, well, good. She's got something to do. That's important.
Yeah, and it's outside, so I let the children out to play. I think it's important.
Let the deer in.
Anyway, I'm laughing because if anybody thinks that David and I coordinate this show,
you're crazy.
Look at yesterday's opening and look at today's.
My whole family's asleep.
Right
There's
there,
a deer in my house. Yeah, all kinds of things happen here.
Right.
None of which are in order, by the way.
But some of my listeners want to know from yesterday is I know you got the alarm shut off on the iPhone, and I know you got your kid up in time for school, but did you ever find your wife?
Yes, I did. Asleep upstairs.
Okay, I just want to make sure everything's okay there. Don't leave us hanging.
Official comment on it was, we'll say, oh, crap. What time is it? Yeah.
That works.
Right.
Well, so again, a very thoroughly professional show David and I do. Do not try this at home.
Right. Well, it keeps it real, I suppose. We handled it pretty well. I got a nice comment, which was that the echoing of the alarm just slightly out of the room and away from the microphone made it sound, this person said, like we were broadcasting from the bridge of the Enterprise. So that's a suitably cool thing, I think. That little, I don't know what that instrument is that pings like that. I don't think they have space sonar, but I think that's what it's supposed to be.
But make it so.
Yes. This is, I guess, the original cast type thing, and I don't know, all pretty cool.
I'm looking through my Twitter feed here, and I'm seeing discussion about how, it's a very compelling case, but from a legal perspective, I'm just not sure whether or not they've made the case that Trump is totally responsible for everything. And again, we get back to what we started with. This isn't a legal case. It is a political case being tried by a political jury. And so the standards are different, and the question isn't whether or not in a court of law you can convict him for this, that, or anything else. The question is, what did he do to his office? And that's what's being judged. And so, let's be clear about that. On the other hand, whether you decide to or not is another political issue, which we've discussed, in depth. So that's what I got for today. I signed off abruptly the first time, but I think I'll sign off more gently this time.
Okay.
Because, I don't have anything else.
Oh, well, all right. No deer or anything?
Okay. Not yet.
How's
apparently,
that going?
they don't like Abby chasing them, so they tend to leave rather quickly.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. That's probably what she's there for. So all going according to Abby's plan anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, it wasn't wolves. It wasn't a moose, so I think we're okay.
Wolves, right, yeah. Okay. Dinosaurs. What else wasn't it? All right.
Space aliens.
Well, all things normal there. Is it snowing? How's the weather?
I got another inch or two, but nothing terrible.
All
and actually, that's my next task. We'll finish the show, and I have to go out and shovel.
Okay, right.
But we still have power, so I'm very happy about that.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's it's a big improvement this year in terms of the power interruption during the winter. So
far, that generator has run 157 hours.
On wood for that. Pretty good. And
that's the amount of time that we've lost power since we put it in.
That's quite a bit, honestly. Yeah. So it saved you a lot in your refrigerator too.
Yeah, saved the show on a couple of occasions too.
Excellent.
Alrighty, take care, and we'll see what happens, and we'll see if he gets convicted or not by Monday morning when we have our next
that would be great.
Show. Probably he'll not have voted yet, but maybe the vote will be Monday. Who knows? Do they work Mondays? I don't know. It's the Senate. I think they only work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Yeah, if they keep him in for the weekend, I suppose they can vote on Monday. Sure, why not? We'll find out. All right. Very good. I believe we've got it all under control today. Everybody's awake who has to be awake, and no alarms going off. So good. Thanks, Greg.
Fantastic. So I could leave. Take care, and I'll talk to you on Monday.
Okay. She's back in for the report on the deer. I'd like to know how that went. Okay. Let's see. So we got Justin Amash on the record here. True. That was a good point. I wonder what he was on the budget committee when he did that, and I think it's sort of a distraction to go off the rails and try and find that out right now. But I'll bet that's it could be the case. Also, of course, they could just hold everybody to the party line on votes like that. And he was I think he was universally acknowledged as a pain in the ass for both his own party and the Democrats. And but it's an interesting story and a well taken, that point. So I mentioned that the Huffington Post had done some reporting on what Trump knew and when he knew it with regard to Pence's safety. I saw last night, who was tweeting this, one of the Obama people, and I can't remember which one it was, but just saying it was, I guess it had been alleged by Trump defenders at some point that Trump wasn't clear on just how dangerous the situation was. Maybe that was supposed to be what was excusing him from conviction in all of this. But the idea that Trump, or the idea that Pence would have been moved by the Secret Service in particular, and that the Secret Service wouldn't have made it clear to the rest of the Secret Service that this was going on, and therefore to Trump. that this was going on, that the president at the time would not be made aware by the Secret Service when a threat to the life of the vice president was then currently active, seems difficult to believe. But this additional reporting from the Huffington Post, it's SV Date reporting here. Trump's tweet attacking Pence came right after learning his VP's life was in danger. A statement from Senator Tommy Tuberville shows Trump turned his mob against Pence minutes after hearing his vice president had to be hustled from the Senate. And that, I guess, good reporting, and both that synthesizes both something like Mike Lee's objection to the veracity of that story, which doesn't really seem to be in doubt, but also with the additional security camera footage that played a large role in yesterday's presentation from the House managers. They showed a lot of never before seen by the public footage, and one of them included the footage of the Secret Service hustling the vice president and his family, who were there for the proceedings for whatever reason, out of the building. It was first moved from the Senate floor into a safe room somewhere, and then later from out of there to yet another safer, presumably, room. And I've seen various reports that seem to suggest that at some point they made it out of the Capitol, but then there was also some claim that he spent almost all, if not all, of that time actually inside the Capitol. So I'm not entirely clear. I didn't pay close enough attention to what happened with Pence later in the day. But what was important here was the footage of him slipping out, really basically in between groups of insurgents running past the door behind which he was being held. So it was really a close call for a lot of these people. I guess the only thing that could be considered exculpatory at all for some of the rioters from yesterday was, I guess you could point at, just like everything Trump does, they were bumbling idiots and totally ineffective at what they were supposed to be there doing, according to the House manager. I mean, that's the only serious weakness in what was being presented by the managers was that this was being portrayed, they're playing up the danger here. And I agree that there was serious danger to any member of Congress who fell into the hands of the mob. It's just sort of amazing to watch how many opportunities there were for that to happen and how at every turn the mob flubbed it. They didn't know what they were doing, and thank God that they didn't. But, the managers spent time discussing how, at least potentially, they could have known what they were doing, because they came with a plan, they came with maps, they got instructions and directions from unknown sources, telling them not only, known sources like Lauren Boebert, who were tweeting out that the speaker had been removed from the House chamber. And so I guess from that you were supposed to deduce, don't come looking for her in the House chamber, look for her elsewhere. But also that they got specific directions, and the managers were reading about where some of the insurgents had received messages instructing them as to where many members of Congress were sheltering, and that they ought to be sealed in. And then it says, turn on the gas. And that's very ominous. And of course, that might have meant, loosing, a natural gas line or something, and asphyxiating members of Congress who were trapped in whatever part of the building. But it's also, I guess I would say, just to be thorough about it, it's not entirely clear that there was a natural gas line anywhere around it. It wasn't like, just according to our plan, we have trapped them in that part of the building where they think they're safe, but we know there to be natural gas lines that can be opened up. They didn't know anything about that. Like, turn on the gas was, I guess I would argue if I was defending them, just wishful thinking. Like, I hope there's a gas line there. Now, I will say that as I saw, they didn't mention this, the House managers didn't talk about exactly where those members were, but as I understand it from reading some of these messages ahead of time, was that they were believed to be in the tunnels connecting the House and Senate office buildings, where the members have their offices, to the Capitol and to each other. And in some of those tunnels, yes, indeed, there are hot water lines and steam lines and presumably natural gas lines as well. I'm not 100% positive. But that might have all have been just wishful thinking about what materials the attackers had access to. But I guess more to my point about how terrible, how terribly organized or how terribly disorganized, I suppose, the attack really was. Some of the video we saw was rioters breaking into the various chambers and asking, is this the Senate? Like they couldn't tell the difference on sight. I mean, maybe you have to be a pretty serious political junkie and watch enough C-SPAN to know. But I mean, okay, I know I can, and I know probably several other people can tell at sight, show me the floor and I'll tell you whether that's the House or the Senate. They don't look alike. There's some very distinct differences. And these guys had, if they were on a mission and they had the flex cuffs and they were going to get, would they recognize Nancy Pelosi necessarily? I think probably they have seen her enough to be able to tell which one she is. But they had no idea where they were going. A lot of the rioters who broke in to the rotunda, did so figuring that the proceedings would be happening right there in the middle, like under the dome. And no, that's not really the architecture of the Capitol, and it's not the way the thing is laid out. They, of course, the famous pictures of the first people to make it into the Senate chamber, that they did so in the observers galleries, the public visitors galleries, up on the third floor because they didn't know the entrance to the Senate was on the second floor. And, all of these sorts of things. I'm not certain how well they really understood what they were doing. And again, thank God that they didn't. There were clearly some people who thought they were tactically prepared, but really weren't. But that was my amazing takeaway from the day. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Edwards Radio. Some other items of the day to catch up on. I have here the tweet of one Craig Kaplan, C-SPAN Capitol Hill producer, reminding us of the other things happening on Capitol Hill today. New York's 22nd congressional district has finally filled its seat in Congress. Republican Representative-elect, now Representative Claudia Tenney, welcomed back to the House. She was a member of the House in one of the previous Congresses. Lost to Anthony Brindisi, and then in a rematch, unseated him. And she now has been sworn into the House for the 117th Congress. This morning, during the House's pro forma session, the Speaker swore her in. She was certified the winner of the November general election race earlier this week over Anthony Brindisi after a lengthy New York court battle over disputed ballots. That would have been, by the way, the second House seat where the dispute was close enough that the House majority, the Democrats, could have used the power of the majority to refer the disputed elections to the House Administration Committee, who could have then studied the situation and have recommended that the House seat the Democrat rather than the Republican. And by sheer force of the majority vote, that could have been exactly what happened. This happened in the Iowa 2nd District race and also in New York 22. And in both cases, I'll just note for the record, Democrats declined to do so. And I think probably the right call. It's especially if you're in the middle of an impeachment trial for Trump that stems initially from his insistence on a big lie about the outcome of the election. It wouldn't look particularly good if the courts had come to the conclusion that the vote count went in favor of the Republicans and Democrats, simply because they held the majority, reversed the decision and installed more Democrats. As important as it might be to have more Democrats in the House when it's narrowly divided, they didn't do it. So, noting for the record, there will be no thanks for it, and the repayment for doing the right thing will be Republicans taking advantage of it and doing the wrong thing. But there you have it. And at some level, you have to be thankful that they do things this way and say, all right, it's worth, risking things and worth losing seats once in a while to do the right thing. But you sort of hope that the right thing will continue to happen, even if control of the body turns over to Republicans. But it doesn't really work that way. So that's the downside of things, I suppose. Let's see. Greg is sending me some other late signals. Let's see what he's got in mind here. Let's see. I'll open up the tweet and read it that way. Alex Moe, NBC News Capitol Hill producer, tweeting, aides say today managers will provide some additional evidence. That sounds fun. Show Trump's role, and the impact that had, and then move on to a harm section beyond the obvious physical harm and focus on the president's lack of remorse, and then finally cover the legal issues that implies. So that will be, interesting and exciting, and we'll look forward to that. And thanks for sending that one on, Greg. Let's see. Other bits and pieces of news worthy of either at least of sharing or distracting ourselves with. I mentioned the other day the conservative activist / maybe kind of sort of terrorist incitement kind of guy, Ali Alexander, and the fact that he had some role in organizing the activities of 1-6 and is on the lam, essentially. Let's see, who's passing this along? Will Sommer, reporter for the Daily Beast, who, by the way, his Twitter bio notes is in the middle of writing a book on QAnon, sends along this note. January 6th organizer, now in hiding, vows to create a MAGA megacity, which seems really beyond his skills. But anyway, plus a backup city, like in case the MAGA megacity, implodes or falls apart due to cheap construction. I don't know what that means, a backup city. But the backup city, just to add more confusion to things and more like, what the hell are you even talking about to it? The backup city will be in South America somehow. Not like the South of America, but the continent, I guess. Let's see. Will is retweeting the tweet of, I don't know what. I mean, it's obviously the name is a parody account. Jared Kushner, rather than Kushner, who I guess traffics on Twitter in deleted Parler videos, as well as a couple of other interesting items. And he's got this here. Ali Alexander says the free press should be abolished. That sounds like an interesting idea for an American. He plans to build a MAGA megacity for 10 million people. We'll have a lot of room in that one. And he'll hold rallies again in March, and a lot of people will end up rioting. So I guess the real takeaway from that one is, one, this guy is still in need of arrest, and for whatever reason they aren't finding him. And two, I guess perhaps the warning that maybe the March 4th thing is going to materialize in some more activity and possibly violence after all. Why it would happen at the Trump Hotel, I have no idea. But clearly the marketers at the Trump Hotel think there's $1 to be made, and so they'll do it, even if they're completely wrong. Okay, let's see. What else have we got to share today? We'll shift gears at least a little bit and bring this news to the fore. It's related in that it involves Rudy Giuliani and him being in big trouble. And that's got something to do with the impeachment as well, but slightly different track here. Trump Justice Department, reports the New York Times, sought to block search of Giuliani records. Hang on and see what they're describing here. The subheader says, Manhattan prosecutors had been prepared to seek a search warrant for electronic records related to powerful Ukrainians who had helped Rudy Giuliani, they say Rudolph Giuliani, dig for dirt on the Biden family. So back to Ukraine, at least just briefly. This, I think, is probably accompanied by another story from Where? Yes, just the other day. Maybe we'll start with this one. Time magazine, which is easy to ignore because, geez, News Weekly. Hello, the 1960s called. They want their magazines back. But they're online, so we have this. Exclusive report from them the other day, and I guess now everybody else picking up on it. Ukraine releases shock, that's in scare quotes, shock call with Giuliani as Trump's second impeachment trial begins. There's still more to be understood about what happened in the Ukraine situation, which is, the timing is good. I mean, given that I think everybody still remembers that the first impeachment was about Ukraine. And we really do have some unfinished business there. And so Ukraine is chiming in with that news. Let's see. Simon Schuster, I think we've read an article of his before and remarked, I wonder if that's Schuster or Schuster, and he sounds like his name is like too much like the publishing company, and it seems kind of weird. I think that's the comment we made last time. All right, what does Time have to say about this? Tell us, Simon. Quote, here begins the story. Let these investigations go forward. Rudy Giuliani told the presidential headquarters in Kyiv, Ukraine, his voice turning impatient. Get someone to investigate this. On the other end of the line, hunched over a speakerphone, two Ukrainian officials listened in disbelief as Giuliani demanded probes that could help his client, then President Donald Trump, win another term in office. The 40-minute call, which now brings to mind the call to Raffensperger, the Secretary of State of Georgia, and all the other calls that Trump made in pursuit of his big lie about the election. But back to this now, just the big lie preceding the election. The 40-minute call, a transcript of which was obtained by Time, provides the clearest picture yet of Giuliani's attempts to pressure the Ukrainians on Trump's behalf. The president's personal lawyer toggled between veiled threats, be careful, he warned repeatedly, and promises to help improve Ukraine's relations with Trump. My only motive, it isn't to get anybody in trouble who doesn't deserve to be in trouble, Giuliani said. For our country's sake and for your country's sake, we need to get all these facts straight, he added. We fixed them and we put it behind us. All right, still trying to finagle investigations of the Bidens at this time. The conversation on July 22nd, 2019, kicked off the campaign of intimidation that resulted in Trump's first impeachment. For a year and a half, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and his aides, a year and a half, really. He and his aides said little. Oh yes, okay. I thought they were saying that the campaign of intimidation went on for a year and a half. It's the year and a half that has passed since this campaign was underway, and now. Okay, so for a year and a half, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and his aides said little about their interactions with Giuliani, not wanting to anger an emissary of the U.S. president. But now, as the Trump era ends with a historic second impeachment trial, by the way, the Ukrainians have begun to speak up about the circumstances that led to the first. They are also taking steps that could imperil Giuliani and his Ukrainian allies. Igor Novikov, maybe we have the pronunciation right, Igor Novikov, who, maybe Novikov, who knows, who served as a close advisor to Zelensky during Trump's first impeachment, says he is willing to assist an ongoing federal investigation of Giuliani that is reportedly underway in New York. We'll get back to that in a minute, as well as a separate effort to strip Giuliani of his license to practice law. Zelensky's government has taken legal action against Giuliani's Ukrainian associates, and they have opened up to the media about the pressure campaign mounted by Trump and his allies. On February 3rd, Novikov sent Time a transcript of the Giuliani call, whose accuracy Time has independently verified. Whose is the wrong word there, but that's what they used. Anyway, Giuliani did not respond to a list of detailed questions about the transcript of his call with the Ukrainian officials and the Ukrainian support, for his disbarment or the federal investigation. So no comment from him. In a series of interviews, Zelensky's advisors say their motives are not to get even with Giuliani, though that would be a good one, or merely clarify the historical record. The goal is to rebuild relations with the U.S. now that President Joe Biden has taken office. The past is the past, Zelensky told Time in a statement on February 4th. I care deeply about the future of our relationship with the United States, so I want to focus on that. The Ukrainian moves highlight the raft of fresh threats to Trump and his associates now that he's left office. Like he could be arrested. Under the Constitution, impeachment by the House and a conviction by the Senate are the remedies for presidential misconduct. Trump is now likely to escape conviction for the second time in the impeachment context anyway. Yet his critics don't have to rely on Congress to punish Trump and his allies, at least not anymore, I would say. They are finding ways to do it themselves through libel lawsuits, criminal investigations, pressure to ban his social media accounts, and other means. The costs are mounting for Giuliani and his associates, especially the Russian agents and Ukrainian politicians who aided his crusade to get Trump reelected in 2020. In the final days of Trump's term, the U.S. government sanctioned 7 of these men, all Ukrainian citizens, for being part of a Russia-linked foreign influence network that promoted Giuliani's spurious claims against the Bidens. I'm surprised they didn't block that entirely. Zelensky's government has launched its own counteroffensive against Giuliani and his enablers in Ukraine. It moved to shut down several Ukrainian media outlets that broadcast unsubstantiated claims of corruption against the Biden family, which Giuliani spent more than a year trying to prove and publicize. One of the Ukrainian lawmakers who helped him, Alexander Dubinsky, was kicked out of Zelensky's political party on February 1st. Potentially more worrying for Giuliani is the Ukrainian support for the investigations he is reportedly facing in New York. Novikov tells Time that he is providing assistance to a legal campaign to revoke Giuliani's law license. Novikov also is open to helping the investigation that the former New York City mayor is reportedly facing in the Southern District of New York, the same office where Giuliani made his name as a prosecutor in the 1980s. If I get an official request from SDNY or any other nonpartisan effort, such as potential disbarment of Rudy Giuliani, I would be open to helping them, says Novikov, who left government in August, but remains close to Zelensky's administration. That is because I believe Mayor Giuliani's actions in Ukraine threatened our national security, he adds. It is our responsibility to make sure that any effort to drag our country into allies' domestic politics does not go unpunished. Initiated in 2019, the SDNY investigation is reportedly focused on Giuliani's alleged lobbying on behalf of Ukrainian politicians, as well as business deals that his associates pursued in the country's energy sector. You know all about those. Remember them? Lev Parnas, Igor Fruman, right? A spokesman for the Southern District declined to comment on the status of the probe, though an NBC News report indicated that it is ongoing as of December. At least 2 Ukrainian officials have told Time that they already discussed Giuliani with SDNY investigators. It was weird, says one, describing a visit in 2019 to their Manhattan offices, which Giuliani led before becoming mayor of New York City. There I am to give testimony against Giuliani, and hanging on the wall, they've got these pictures of him shaking hands with people. That must have been a little surreal. Giuliani has long insisted that there is no grounds, are no grounds anyway, for SDNY to investigate him. After NBC News reported in December that prosecutors are seeking access to his communications, Giuliani tweeted, "They want to seize my emails. No reason. No wrongdoing." On his video blog and other outlets, the former mayor has also defended his ethical standards. "I'm not stupid." Well, I dispute that, but that's what he said on his radio show, January 14th. "I don't want to get into trouble. I have a high sense of ethics, personally. I hate it when people attack my integrity." Well, too bad. In the phone call with Zelensky's aides in 2019, Giuliani was careful to avoid explicitly asking for a favor, according to the transcript, because, mob boss protocols. But what's interesting is that Trump's idea of mob boss protocols is, oh, no, you do ask for the favor. But then you say, it's just a favor. I'm not demanding anything, just a favor. Well, I don't think either of those will work. But anyhow, So he avoids asking for a favor, saying, I have no interest in anybody not telling the truth or exaggerating. It isn't about political favor, Giuliani said on the call. He also seemed keenly aware of the dilemma he was creating for the Ukrainians and how it might make them feel. You shouldn't feel terrible, he said. All we need from the president is to say, I'm putting an honest prosecutor on these investigations, and he will dig up the evidence that presently exists. But from the Ukraine's perspective, the call put the Zelensky government in a perilous position. That first phone call left me in a state of shock, says Novikov, who participated in the call along with Andrei Yermak, then a top advisor to Zelensky and currently his chief of staff. After we hung up the phone, without a shadow of a doubt, I knew that we were in grave danger. 3 days after that conversation, Trump held a phone call with Zelensky that would become Exhibit A in his first impeachment inquiry. He used the call to make some of the same requests of the Ukrainians that his lawyer made earlier that week. Trump famously asked Zelensky to do us a favor by opening investigations related to Biden and his son Hunter, who had served on the board of a Ukrainian gas company. At the dawn of the Biden administration, Zelensky and his top aides have embarked on a mini media tour to discuss some of these events. During an interview with Axios, broadcast on January 31st, Zelensky was asked whether he felt a little bit angry at Trump. The Ukrainian leader laughed and responded, a little bit? The day before the interview aired, details of Giuliani's first phone call with Zelensky's aides appeared in the Washington Post, which cited Novikov's notes from the conversation. Trump ordered a freeze on some $400 million in aid to Ukraine in the summer of 2019. After learning of the move, Zelensky and his aides prepared to announce the investigations that Trump and Giuliani wanted. But thankfully, before they went through with it, a complaint from a whistleblower inside the White House exposed Giuliani's pressure campaign, and Trump agreed to release the aid to Ukraine. So what that tells us, of course, is that what's the name of the lieutenant colonel inside the White House was Alexander. Why can't I bring his name to mind? Will any of this? Vindman, that's it. Alexander Vindman, I guess, being the whistleblower. I guess they were that close to getting what they wanted out of the Ukrainians, and if it wasn't for the whistleblower report, they might have gotten away with it. I guess Alexander Vindman is the meddling kid in this situation. Looking back on those events, Zelensky's advisors still wonder what the fallout would have been if those investigations of the Biden family had been opened. The consequences could have been catastrophic, says Yermak, the chief of staff to Ukraine's president. I think we avoided domestic American politics, he tells Time. At least that was our mission all along. So just opening the investigations, what they mean, I think, is that it would have been catastrophic for U.S.-Ukrainian relationship, especially if Biden were then to go on and win the presidency. And the task of repairing U.S.-Ukrainian relations in the wake of knuckling under to Trump's manipulation to the detriment of Biden could have been catastrophic, as opposed to, I'm sure Republicans will read this and say, yeah, it would have been catastrophic for Biden because they would have found all the evidence. But that's not, I don't think, what they mean here. All right, I want to move on from that to the next Giuliani story, although I'll pause in between to note the tweet we got from Boo Radley, who says about the backup city in South America that Alexander is talking about or was talking about. Yeah, kind of like how all those Nazi war criminals fled to South America, perhaps. I guess that's probably the best parallel for it. Yeah, so now back over to the New York Times and their Giuliani angle. Again, Trump Justice Department sought to block search of Giuliani's records. And I gather that this has to do with the SDNY investigation into what Giuliani is up to. And the fact that the investigation never came to a head and ended with any action against Giuliani during the Trump administration is testament to how effective the block was. Ben Protess and William K. Rashbaum reporting for the New York Times just yesterday. In the final months of the Trump administration, senior Justice Department officials repeatedly sought to block federal prosecutors in Manhattan from taking a crucial step in their investigation into Rudy Giuliani's dealings in Ukraine, delaying a search warrant for some of Mr. Giuliani's electronic records, according to people with knowledge of the matter. Remember, these were the ones about which he said there was no reason for the search to take place. And I think he knew then he would end up looking like that was true, so long as the search warrants weren't, in fact, executed. And as long as he could block them, it would look like he was right, that there was no reason for this search. The actions by political appointees at the Justice Department in Washington effectively slowed the investigation as it was gaining momentum last year. That, of course, is called obstruction of justice, and it's an impeachable offense. In the final months of 2020, the prosecutors were still delving into whether Mr. Giuliani had illegally lobbied the Trump administration on behalf of Ukrainian officials and oligarchs who had helped him look for dirt in 2019 on Joe Biden. Then, of course, the leading Democratic candidate, leading Democratic candidate, the People said, Mr. Giuliani has denied any wrongdoing. Can you believe it? His lawyer, Robert J. Costello, declined on Wednesday to comment on media speculation. Unflinchingly loyal to former President Donald Trump, Mr. Giuliani has been a central figure in both of the former president's impeachments, first working on Mr. Trump's behalf in Ukraine and then spearheading a drive to overturn the election results that culminated in the January 6th rally, which really they might as well just have come right out and said insurrection, before Trump supporters violently stormed the Capitol. Oh, I see. They're only crediting him with the rally. Last summer, well, not the trial by combat comments. I guess that enters into it. Last summer, prosecutors and FBI agents in Manhattan were preparing to seek the search warrant for Giuliani's records related to his efforts in Ukraine, said these people who spoke on condition of anonymity. Why? Because they're not allowed to talk about this during an ongoing investigation. But first, the investigators in Manhattan had to notify Justice Department officials in Washington, who must be consulted about search warrants involving lawyers because of concerns that prosecutors might inadvertently obtain confidential communications with clients. The warrant involving Mr. Giuliani was particularly sensitive because of his most prominent client, Mr. Trump, if indeed he really had a attorney-client relationship with Trump. I would question that. While career Justice Department officials in Washington largely supported the search warrant, senior officials raised concerns that the warrant would be issued too close to the election. The people with knowledge of the matter said, remember when that was a legitimate objection? But didn't they get a memo? I thought they had a memo in hand already from Attorney General Barr saying that rule was no longer operative. But apparently it's no longer operative as against Biden or anyone connected with Democrats. Those investigations can be conducted close to elections, but investigations of Republicans cannot be. I think we speculated that that's what they meant at the time, and now we see that that is in fact the case. In the 60 days before an election, the Justice Department generally tries to avoid taking aggressive investigative actions that could affect the outcome of the vote if the actions were to become public. Of course, that went out the window with James Comey and the Hillary Clinton investigations in 2016, and then formally with Bill Barr's memo. The Manhattan prosecutors noted to officials in Washington that they initially raised the idea in the summer, before the 60-day cutoff, the people said, and then after the election, the prosecutors tried again. But even then, political appointees in Trump's Justice Department, including officials in the Deputy Attorney General's office at the time, did not approve, noting Mr. Trump was still contesting the election results in several states, a legal effort being led by Giuliani, the people said. And I think that's a good note. The opposition rankled both the Manhattan prosecutors and some career officials in Washington who questioned whether senior officials were treating all politically sensitive investigations equally after the election. While Manhattan prosecutors still faced opposition to examining Mr. Giuliani's records, federal prosecutors in Delaware were allowed to issue subpoenas for a tax investigation into Biden's son, Hunter. So, essentially, what the hell is the question here? And while the political appointees were skeptical that there was enough evidence to charge Mr. Giuliani, the career officials involved felt there was sufficient reason to believe that the search would turn up evidence of a crime, the legal standard to obtain a warrant. Ultimately, senior officials in Washington proposed delaying a decision on the subpoena until the Biden administration took over. It's unclear whether the prosecutors have obtained a warrant since Biden was sworn in. We'll continue with this exciting story and a few more after this. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We'll continue with reading this article about Giuliani, I guess. So we'll jump back out for one more comment. You remember the one I read you before from Boo Radley, who's BooRad7 on Twitter, if you'd like to follow along with your fellow listeners. You've got some agreement here from a checkmark type person who sees the same relationship here. Who's tweeting here? Ben McElwain, who is... whose Twitter bio tells me nothing about, I love to be able to read people's bios, and some of them are funny and some of them are self-referential, but they're not in this case. But Ben mentioning here, what's his comment? Oh, I'll have to go back to it. I've lost it because I went to look at the bio here. But Ben tweets as sideways, that's CYDEWEYS, just in case you were trying to follow along, and now the tweet is gone. But basically said, I wonder if there was ever another extremist movement in world history that wanted to, quote, create a backup city in South America. And I think you're getting at the same point. So you got backup on that one, Boo, and well done. Let's see. Back to the New York Times article. Where did we leave off here? Ultimately, senior officials in Washington proposed delaying until the Biden administration was sworn in. The episode, and you'll recall here, just to refresh your memory, we're talking about the Southern District of New York's investigation into Giuliani and his relationship with the Ukrainians and whether he was illegally lobbying on behalf of these Ukrainian oligarchs during the Trump administration. And they wanted a subpoena for some of his communications. And the top brass, I guess, in the political ranks at the Justice Department said, no, can't do it. Too close to an election. Even though they first proposed it in the summer, they just delayed making a decision until it was within 60 days of an election and said that rule that blocks us from doing this stuff blocks us from doing this stuff, even though Barr had rescinded the rule and they had then subsequently used it inside the 60-day window to launch an investigation of Hunter Biden. But they were still standing there saying that the rules prevent this with respect to Giuliani. The episode was not the only time Mr. Trump's Justice Department had tried to intervene in a politically sensitive investigation by the United States Attorney's Office in Manhattan, one of the most independent prosecutors' offices in the country. You recall that Greg frequently says it is referred to as the Sovereign District of New York rather than the Southern District. In June, Mr. Trump fired the head of the office, Jeffrey Berman, who oversaw a number of investigations into Trump's allies, including Steve Bannon, whom he later pardoned, of course. CNN first reported on Wednesday that the potential search warrant was met with resistance from Justice Department officials in Washington who questioned the strength of the evidence against Giuliani. In December, NBC News reported that the Manhattan prosecutors had discussed making a legal request for Giuliani's electronic communications. The investigation into Giuliani has centered on his dealings with the Ukrainian officials and oligarchs who claimed to have damaging information about Biden's son Hunter, who was on the board of a Ukrainian energy company, the People said. As part of that focus, federal prosecutors in Manhattan scrutinized Giuliani's ties to Dmitry Firtash, a Ukrainian oligarch who is under indictment in the U.S., according to documents and people with knowledge of the matter. Hoping to avoid extradition to the United States, Firtash hired 2 lawyers close to Giuliani to argue his case at the highest levels of the Justice Department, while Giuliani sought Firtash's help in gathering negative information on the Bidens. It is unclear whether the investigation will result in any charges against Giuliani, one-time mayor of New York City and former U.S. attorney, in charge of the same office that is now examining his conduct. Although Giuliani has not been accused of wrongdoing, but come on. Well, I'm accusing him of wrongdoing anyway. He remains vulnerable to federal scrutiny because Trump left office last month, I guess, without granting him a pardon, despite months of speculation that Giuliani might receive preemptive clemency. And then there was word of, there could be secret pardons that get stored in a vault only to be opened later. I guess we'll find out about those at some point. Before Mr. Trump issued a wave of pardons on his last day in office, Giuliani said on his radio show that he didn't need a pardon. I don't commit crimes, he said. Okay. In the final weeks of the Trump administration, Giuliani discussed with associates whether he should seek a pardon before ultimately opting not to do so. 2 people with direct knowledge of the discussion said. The White House counsel's office had cautioned against preemptively pardoning Giuliani. One of the people said, because doing so might raise questions about whether he needed clemency for his involvement in the January 6th rally, the focus of Trump's current impeachment trial. It is unclear whether the federal prosecutors in Washington investigating the riot are also examining Giuliani's speech at the rally. In Manhattan, the federal investigation into Giuliani grew out of a case against 2 Soviet-born men, Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, who aided his mission in Ukraine. Even before his work for Mr. Trump, Giuliani had business in Ukraine, including a 2017 contract to help the town of Kharkiv, I don't know which, improve its emergency services and bolster its image as a destination for investment. Sure, why not? The deal was arranged by Pavel, and I am hoping the pronunciation here is Fuchs or Fuchs. It's Fuks. Really, I think we must have read that name before. Deal arranged by Pavel Fuchs, a wealthy Ukrainian-Russian developer who said that Giuliani was hired to lobby for the town, a claim that Giuliani denies. The Manhattan prosecutors have examined Giuliani's dealings with Fuchs, the people briefed on the matter said. The Manhattan prosecutors also interviewed at least 1 witness who testified before Congress during Trump's impeachment proceedings as part of the examination of Giuliani's potential business dealings in Ukraine and his role in pressing the Trump administration to oust the American ambassador in Kyiv. While pressuring Ukraine to investigate Trump's political rivals, Giuliani became fixated on removing the ambassador, whom he saw as an obstacle to these efforts. At the urging of Mr. Giuliani and other Republicans, Trump ultimately removed the ambassador, Marie Yovanovitch, a decision that was at the heart of the first impeachment trial. Giuliani said he acted as Trump's lawyer, but the federal prosecutors in Manhattan have explored whether he was also working covertly for Ukrainian officials or oligarchs who wanted the ambassador gone for their own reasons, according to people briefed on the matter. Under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, it is a federal crime to try to influence or lobby the United States government at the request or direction of a foreign official without disclosing it to the Justice Department. Yuri Lutsenko, one of the officials who pressed Giuliani and his associates to fight for the ambassador's removal, aided their Ukrainian dirt-digging mission. And at the same time, Giuliani pursued hundreds of thousands of dollars in business from Lutsenko, a potential deal that drew the scrutiny of prosecutors and the FBI. But Giuliani has said he turned down that deal. All right. Well, that's the end of the current writing on it, unless there's been anything this morning that I've missed. But Giuliani, once again, placing himself in the mix of now both the first and second impeachment, which just highlights the similarities between the two and what can I tell you, the common links between the two. And one of the common links is Giuliani, and he should be investigated criminally. I don't see how you could come out of this any other way. Speaking of investigations, we move a step closer down in Georgia. I think we last updated the situation by noting that the Secretary of State had said that they were conducting their own investigation, but they were open to an investigation by the district attorneys or the state attorney general down there in Georgia. And I guess that step is now underway. There was no official investigation from anyone that could bring criminal charges yet, and now that's changing. Georgia prosecutors open criminal investigation into Trump's efforts to subvert election results. The Washington Post reports. It's Amy Gardner doing the reporting here. An Atlanta area prosecutor has opened a criminal investigation into efforts to overturn the 2020 election result in Georgia in the wake of calls Trump placed to state officials urging them to invalidate Biden's victory in the state. In a letter Wednesday to several state Republican officials, including Georgia Governor Brian Kemp and Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, Fulton County District Attorney Fani T. Willis did not mention Trump by name, but stated that her office is examining a raft of potential criminal charges related to attempts to influence the administration of the 2020 election in that state. In early January, Trump pressured Raffensperger to, quote, find enough votes to reverse Biden's victory in the state during an hour-long phone call. He also called the top Georgia state elections investigator shortly before Christmas, the day before, which was really rude, asking the person to find the fraud and become a national hero, as the Washington Post first reported. At the time, the investigator was leading an inquiry into allegations of ballot fraud in Cobb County, in the suburbs of Atlanta. In a third call, placed in early December to Kemp, I didn't even know about this one, I think, Trump urged the governor to persuade the state legislature to overturn Biden's victory and asked him to order an audit of absentee ballot signatures. Prosecutors are scrutinizing all three of those calls, as well as the circumstances around the sudden resignation of the U.S. attorney in Atlanta, according to an official familiar with the probe, who spoke on condition of anonymity, of course, to describe the ongoing investigation. The revelation of the Raffensperger call by the Post, days before Congress was set to meet in joint session to formalize Biden's Electoral College victory, and we know what happened then, sparked widespread political condemnation of Trump's actions, including by some Republicans. After the January 6th attack on the Capitol, the House cited the call in its article of impeachment, which accuses Trump of inciting the siege. On Wednesday, as part of the ongoing Senate trial, House impeachment managers argued that his call to Raffensperger and the chief investigator were part of Trump's long-running attempt to overturn the results of the election. They didn't make mention of the call to the governor there, though. But that would fit. Willis, a Democrat, she's the Fulton County DA, told state officials that her office will examine whether anyone illegally solicited election fraud, made false statements to state and local government officials, made threats, or participated in any criminal conspiracy as part of attempts to influence the election outcome. In addition to Kemp and Raffensperger, Willis sent letters to Georgia's Attorney General, Chris Carr, who represented Raffensperger in numerous lawsuits filed by Trump and his allies over the election, and the Lieutenant Governor, Jeff Duncan, who serves as president of the state Senate. She said she will examine contacts made with the offices of Raffensperger, Kemp, and Carr, as well as with the General Assembly, which held hearings in which Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, and other Trump allies made unfounded allegations of election fraud. We have reason to believe the Senate may have evidence related to the criminal investigation, said Jeff DeSantis, not Ron DeSantis, but Jeff DeSantis, DeSantis, a spokesman for Willis. Legal experts have said Trump's call to the Secretary of State may have broken state or federal laws that bar solicitation of election fraud or prohibit participating in a conspiracy against people exercising their civil rights, and that his outreach to the state investigator could amount to obstruction of justice or other criminal violations. Trump advisor Jason Miller, criminal himself, on Wednesday dismissed the criminal investigation as a partisan attack against the former president. The timing here is not accidental given today's impeachment trial, Miller said via text. This is simply the Democrats' latest attempt to score political points by continuing their witch hunt against President Trump, and everybody sees through it. Right, sure. After the November 3rd election, Trump pressured officials in numerous states, urging them to reverse Biden's win. All of that detailed by the managers yesterday. His greatest focus was on Georgia, where he complained to aides that he felt betrayed by Kemp and Raffensperger after they refused to echo his claim of rigged elections, despite his endorsement of them in 2018. Everything's transactional for him. I scratched your back, you're supposed to scratch mine. In an interview with the Post last month, Raffensperger said he was not familiar with the specifics of what the president said in the conversation with his chief investigator, but said it was inappropriate for Trump to have tried to intervene in the case. That was an ongoing investigation, Raffensperger said. I don't believe that an elected official should be involved in that process. The Post is not identifying the investigator, who did not respond to requests for comment because of the risks of threats and harassment directed at elections officials. In a recording of the conversation obtained, a little more than a week after calling the investigator, Trump called Raffensperger directly, and of course they got the recording of that. Trump, during that call, alternately berated Raffensperger, tried to flatter him, begged him to act, and threatened him with vague criminal consequences if the Secretary of State refused to pursue his false claims about widespread fraud, at one point warning that Raffensperger was taking a big risk. Throughout the call, Raffensperger and his office's general counsel rejected Trump's assertions, explaining that the president was relying on debunked conspiracy theories and that Biden's 11,779 vote victory in Georgia was legit. But Trump brushed aside their responses. The people of Georgia are angry, and the people of the country are angry, Trump said on the call, and there's nothing wrong with saying, that you've recalculated. Raffensperger responded, well, Mr. President, the challenge that you have is that the data you have is wrong. At another point, Trump said, so look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state. No, you didn't. And you certainly, I love the claim that they won the state by one vote, too. But okay. We won overwhelmingly, a landslide, one vote. In her letter to the state officials on Wednesday, Willis asked officials to preserve all records related to the 2020 election. She said the matter is of high priority and will go before a grand jury as soon as March. She said she has no reason to believe that any Georgia state officials are the subject of the investigation. I know we all agree that our duty demands that this matter be investigated and, if necessary, prosecuted in a manner that is free from any appearance of conflict of interest or political considerations, Willis wrote in the letters, which were first reported by the New York Times. I don't know that Republicans actually agree with that, but they might feel compelled to say so. The district attorney's investigation follows the news Monday that Raffensperger's office had opened its own inquiry to assess whether Trump broke any laws in his efforts to reverse his defeat in Georgia. The inquiry was prompted by multiple complaints the office received about the Trump-Raffensperger call, including one from a law professor at George Washington University, John Banshoff. The Secretary of State's office investigates complaints that it receives. Raffensperger spokesman Walter Jones said in a statement, the investigations are fact-finding and administrative in nature. Any further legal efforts will be left to the Attorney General. Typically, the individual leading that inquiry would be the chief investigator who received the Trump call in December, but Raffensperger or his aides may decide to assign a different investigator to avoid a conflict. Raffensperger told his aides that he's likely to recuse himself when the results of the inquiry come to the state election board, which will decide whether to refer the matter to the state attorney general or the district attorney. Willis's office is also investigating the abrupt departure of Byung Jae, or B.J. Pak, the former U.S. attorney in Atlanta, who left a day after the Post reported Trump's call with Raffensperger. Pak unexpectedly announced January 4th that he was stepping down as the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, surprising many of in his office. Trump then bypassed Pak's top deputy in selecting a temporary replacement, raising questions among legal observers about the possibility of political interference in law enforcement work. Pak, the Justice Department, and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Georgia declined to comment. Separately, the Justice Department Inspector General is also examining Pak's resignation. Bobby Christine, who served temporarily as acting U.S. Attorney after Pak's departure, later told staff in the office that there's just nothing to the few claims of fraud the office was examining. Well, no wonder he got the job. All right, and that winds up the Post's reporting on this. I will note that I got a question put to me yesterday evening from our good friend Matthew Rigdon, who specifically has a question, and maybe Armando will want to address this, and maybe tomorrow's a good day to do it. I don't know. We'll see what the schedule's like. And I think I would rather have Armando address it because this is really a better question for a practicing attorney. But with reference to this investigation, Matthew says, I'm curious if you or Armando can speak to how impeachment hearings would or wouldn't handicap criminal investigations going on simultaneously. I wonder if that's why Dems aren't dragging the impeachment proceedings out. And he asks specifically with reference to the Georgia investigations. Now, offhand, I don't know if I would venture a guess on this. It's very often the case, or has been the case in the past, that proceedings on Capitol Hill have a way of screwing with criminal investigations elsewhere. There have been instances where that's happened. I don't know whether any of this would impact the investigation, if only because, there's no, particularly if there's no testimony offered in the impeachment proceeding. I don't see what the interference would be right now. Here's what it might explain is it might explain, well, not exactly, but with respect to any of the calls to Georgia, it might explain why the record being presented by the impeachment managers relies solely on newspaper reports and publicly available information. In that way, it couldn't possibly, I don't think, interfere with the investigation going on down in Georgia. But I suppose if they called witnesses, then there might be something to it if they managed to get testimony. I don't know, but I think you'd have to get testimony in a manner that implicated its validity as evidence in the Georgia investigation. If you promised some sort of immunity in exchange for the testimony, that might do something like that. But certainly not reading into the record articles, I would guess, that are publicly available. But maybe Armando has something different to say about that, and he'd know better as a practicing courtroom attorney than I would. I have to go back to my legal training, which I think most practicing attorneys will tell you your legal training in law school probably not really going to prepare you very well for the realities of how things go in the courtroom. So, okay. Let's see. What other stories can we fit in the couple of minutes that we have remaining that are of the greatest relevance? Maybe this one. I have a New York Times article that I meant to bring to Greg's attention, and so we'll do so afterwards if he's not still listening. But he brought up the other day, I think, the first of these stories about an unusual number of Republicans in one state or another who were re-registering, whether they were re-registering as Democrats or independents. They were dropping their affiliation with the Republican Party. And I now have a New York Times article that goes to the same point. But prior to that, I had put aside somewhere another similar note from a different state. I forget which state we were talking about, but one of the two was Utah. And I don't know whether that was the one I have the article about or the one that Greg told us about. But we have at least two states in which there were initial reports. It might have been Utah, because I also have put aside here from Tegan Goddard's Political Wire here, more than 10,000 Arizonans left the GOP last month. So I think that went along with what Greg had told us, and it might have been in Utah where people were re-registering. And now there's this New York Times piece. There's nothing left. It begins this way. That's the quote in the headline. Why thousands of Republicans are leaving the party. Voting registration data indicates a stronger than usual flight from the GOP since the Capitol riot, with an intensely fluid period in American politics now underway. Let's sneak in at least a couple paragraphs here before exiting for the day. Nick Corasaniti, okay. Annie Carney and Isabella Grullon-Paz are the reporters on this piece. In the days after the January 6th attack on the Capitol, the phone lines and websites of local election officials across the country were jumping. Tens of thousands of Republicans were calling or logging on to switch their party affiliations. This is probably something that's relevant to the way Republicans in the Senate ought to be considering this thing. I guess if it was millions, they would be changing their minds, but it wouldn't necessarily be evidence in the trial, but it's something that they should be thinking about. In California, more than 33,000 registered Republicans left the party during the 3 weeks after the Washington riot. In Pennsylvania, more than 12,000 voters left the GOP in the past month, and more than 10,000 Republicans changed their registration in Arizona. An analysis of January voting records by the New York Times found that nearly 140,000 Republicans had quit the party in 25 states that had readily available data. 19 states do not have registration by party. They note, voting experts said the data indicated a stronger than usual flight from a political party after a presidential election, as well as the potential start of a damaging period for GOP registrations as voters recoil from the Capitol violence and its fallout. Among those who recently left the party are Juan Nunez, 56, a Army veteran in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. They must have gone to a diner there and found him. He said he had long felt that the difference between the United States and many other countries was that campaign season fighting ended on Election Day, when all sides would peacefully accept the result. The January 6th riot changed that, he said. What happened in D.C. that day, it broke my heart, said Mr. Nunez, a lifelong Republican who was preparing to register as an independent. It shook me to the core. The biggest spikes in Republicans leaving the party came in the days after January 6th, especially in California, where there were 1,020 Republican changes on January 5th, and then 3,243 on January 7th. In Arizona, there were 233 Republican changes in the first 5 days of January and 3,317 in the next week. Most of the Republicans in these states and others switched to unaffiliated status. They still couldn't stomach becoming Democrats, but okay, fine. Voter rolls often change after presidential elections when registrations sometimes shift toward the winner's party, or people update their old affiliations to correspond with their current party preferences, often at a Department of Motor Vehicles, of course, where you can do that under the motor voter law. Other states remove inactive voters, deceased voters, or those who moved out of the state from all parties, and lump these people together with voters who changed their own registrations. Of the 25 states surveyed by the Times, Nevada, which we'll say that way instead of Nevada, Kansas, Utah, and Oklahoma had combined such voter list maintenance with registration changes, so their overall totals would not be limited to changes that voters made themselves. Other states may have done so as well, but did not indicate in their public data. Among Democrats, 79,000 have left the party since early January, but the tumult at the Capitol and the historic unpopularity of former President Trump have made for an intensely fluid period in American politics. Many Republicans denounced the pro-Trump forces that rioted on the 6th, and 10 Republican House members voted to impeach Trump. Sizable numbers of Republicans now say they support key elements of the Biden stimulus package. Typically, the opposing party is wary, if not hostile, toward the major policy priorities of a new president. We'll stop there and note that they'll be there in the roundup, of course, for your reading. It's time now for Justice to take over for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And as always, plenty to cover that we didn't get here today. And let me skim through and see if I can pick out something particularly juicy to entice you with after this brief message.
From netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
How about this? Republican senators now vow to block Interior Secretary nominee Deb Haaland because she'll actually protect the interior. The conspiracy theory of the Capitol false flag attack has divided Republicans in Oregon, and dozens of former Republican officials are in talks to form a breakaway anti-Trump third party. More on that next.